Greetings, friends. Thank you for joining me as we go over the top with cellist Zlatomir Fung. Zlatomir played on my NPR program no less than 6 times. My favorite memory was our collaboration on David Popper's Vito, that's an Andalusian dance, not Vito Corleone from The Godfather, when Zlatomir was 14 years old. Here's a clip from that performance from 2014. What a great performance. And I remember you played some Bach at the beginning of the program, and you can hear the audience just go crazy from that Popper piece. Zlatomir Fung was the youngest cellist at 20 years of age ever to win first prize at the International Tchaikovsky Competition. Zlatomir Fung has been described by Bach Track as one of those rare musicians with a Midas touch. He quickly envelops every score he plays in an almost palpable golden aura. Please join me in an over-the-top welcome to today's guest, cellist Zlatomir Fung. It's so great to see you, Zlatomir.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I mentioned you performed on our NPR show 6 times. Tell us about your early upbringing. I know we met and played together many times in Boston. Are you from there?
Boston is a city really close to my heart because most of my formative musical education took place there. But I actually began to play the cello when I was 3.5 when my family was living in Oregon. I was living in Corvallis, Oregon, and I had this wonderful first cello teacher who was a Suzuki teacher, and I studied with her for over 6 years. And then when I was 9 years old, my family moved to Boston, and then I started studying at the New England Conservatory Prep School, and that's where I really got into playing cello and classical music, and that's where I did most of my work in that period of my life.
Are your parents musicians?
So they're both actually trained as mathematicians. They were both in pure mathematics. My mother became an academic. She teaches in Worcester, in Massachusetts, at Worcester State University. And my father, after he finished his mathematical studies, he went into industry, and he's been working for a while as a computer programmer.
Wow, fantastic. And so I know you studied at the Juilliard School under the estimable tutelage of Richard Aaron and Timothy Eddy. Who were you working with growing up in Boston? I know you studied at New England Conservatory's Prep Division for 8 years, right?
Yeah, I had a really wonderful time there all throughout my teenage years. My first teacher there was also a Suzuki teacher, Nancy Hare. And she's just this wonderful, wonderful cello teacher. We actually keep in touch. I just saw her about a week ago when I was visiting Boston. And we sort of finished the Suzuki method together, and then she put me on the next step of my path, working on other pieces and learning, some of the Bach suites and stuff like that. And then a few years later, began to work with Emanuel Feldman, who's a wonderful teacher in the Boston area. He was teaching at Tufts University. He was a very important teacher for me. He got me thinking about technique in a much more detailed way than I had before. So yeah, I've been very lucky. I've had all the right teachers at all the right times in my life.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of experience talking to some of our guests about their early Suzuki training. And I remember I just have that image of in my mind of like a mass of string players all playing at the same time. But I found, and I'm sure you'll corroborate, that there's much more an ideological basis. I mean, the triumvirate of parent, student, and teacher is a real active dynamic, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I think for me, the two biggest takeaways from Suzuki and the things that I treasure most, my history with the method, is one, as you said, that element of collaboration, where you're always either playing with others or you're in a position where you're listening to others play for you, in a circle. And there's that sense of real community, which I think is really the heart of what we do as musicians. So there's that. And then there's also the aspect of music as a language that is learned by imitation. I always think about that because I feel like the score itself, fundamentally an imperfect representation of the composer's idea, because they're hearing something to learn at the very beginning, like with imitation, I think gets to the heart of what the musical experience is. And the example that I always use is sometimes when I'm talking to my students about the Happy Birthday. Very few people have ever seen the sheet music for Happy Birthday, yet we all know where you're supposed to do the big crescendo and where you're supposed to do the big ritardando. And that's just because we learned through imitation. And I feel like having that relationship to music at the very beginning was such a gift for me. And
it reminds me of something I read in Timothy Galway's Game of Tennis, where we tend to try very diligently to keep your arm straight or do this or that and the other thing. Our bodies are such wonderful students in their way that it's almost better to. This was back in the day. I was watching McEnroe at Wimbledon or something, and you'd go out on the court, and all of a sudden things would start to click. Who would you say were big role models and influencers in your? I mean, Boston is such an incredible community that, Emmanuel was a wonderful teacher, but who else were you looking up to back in those years?
Yeah, it's really interesting when I think back to that time. Actually, many of the people that I really, really admired, and of course I still do, were basically colleagues of mine, people who were a little bit older, who were also actually people that have also been on From the Top, people like Aaron Wolf and Jonah Ellsworth was a real someone I really admired and still do, of course. But having that atmosphere of collegiality and the sense that they were really doing incredible things, and I saw them and I looked up to them and I wanted to do that. That's what so in that sense, that was really big. Of course, the people that inspired me through their recordings. There's so many of them, but the moment I remember most clearly was probably when I was about 12 years old. It was on my birthday that my father gifted me the complete Decca recordings of Mstislav Rostropovich, and it has all those recordings where he was playing with Benjamin Britten, the Debussy Sonata and the Schumann, and also the Haydn concertos. And I remember I would just I put it in my MacBook on iTunes, and I would just listen to it over and over again. And he was the first musician that really made me think the possibility of what you could really communicate through your playing. It's like he was speaking to you across time. And there's something really amazing about that.
Well said. Zlatomir, you've won so many international awards, starting with the Landgrave of Hesse Prize at the Kronberg Academy Cello Masterclass in 2016. You're a fellow winner of Young Concert Artist 2017. The Schoenfeld International String Competition in Harbin, China in 2018. An Avery Fisher Career Grant in New York in 2020. The Borletti Buitoni Trust Fellowship in London in 2022. But you were truly launched into your stratospheric career by becoming the youngest first prize winner ever at the 2019 International Tchaikovsky Competition in St. Petersburg, Russia. Preparing for all those wins must have been an extraordinary trajectory and experience. Share with us what you took away from that time of preparation, and was there anything in particular special about the run-up to your Tchaikovsky win?
When I look back on that time when I was doing so many competitions, sometimes 2 major competitions in a year, like in 2018, for me, the process of preparing was always the most rewarding part, because I would often learn at least 1 or 2 new pieces as part of the program for the competition, practicing harder than I would otherwise, because I was really motivated. And in the case of the Tchaikovsky competition, I remember I had set aside sort of about a month to just work on the repertoire before I went to Russia. And it ended up being only half a month because I had this other concert that came in the middle, and then this other gig that I really wanted to do. So I did it. But it kind of prepared me in a sense for what it is now, trying to make a living as a musician. You take what you can get in a way.
Yeah, sure.
I always felt that it drove me to a higher level of listening in my playing when I was
Yeah.
preparing for something like that, because I had to think about how what I was doing globally was coming across.
Let's hear now our guest cellist Zlatomir Fung performing Tchaikovsky. Here's the final variation of the Rococo variations in a performance with David Fung. Any relation, David Fung?
No relation.
No, okay. Performance with pianist David Fung at New York City's Kosciuszko Foundation on October 18th, 2023. Gosh, love that piece, and that ending was so brilliant. Just Vladimir, just
Thank
fantastic performance. I've heard you say you don't want to be known for winning the Tchaikovsky. Is that a general aversion to competitions, or if you don't want to be known as the winner of the Tchaikovsky, how would you most want to be known to the wide?
I feel like there's this fundamental tension, with being a competition winner, because obviously it's an incredible honor. It's part of my story. It always will be. It just really was an honor to be recognized, especially by the jury and all those illustrious musicians.
Who was on the jury that year? Or who stands out?
Yeah, a lot of people. I mean, the people that stand out for me are, Misha Maisky, who's someone I've been listening to since I was 5.
Yeah.
Truls Mork, incredible cellist. Clive Gillinson, who was the artistic director of Carnegie Hall, and all sorts of other people that I really looked up to. So it's a part of my story, and the honor will always be there. But at the same time, I feel like in my life as a musician, I've thinking about music in terms of being victor or being better than someone else is an odd feeling, because when I get out on stage now, I just want to create an experience. And for me, it's all about that deep relationship where you open the space. That's why I did the competition, because that's what I want to do. And the competition helped me open doors. So I guess when I say that I don't want to be known for that, I hope that the things that I do hereafter in my life, hopefully create enough substance and sustenance for the audiences that hear me to give them something rich to latch onto. And that's what I hope to give through what I do.
Absolutely. Truly is. Vladimir, one of your distinctive qualities I want to celebrate now is your fascinating taste in repertoire. Where did you first come upon the music of Joseph Marie Clement Ferdinand dell'Abaco?
Dell'Abaco is a very interesting cellist working in the 1700s. And he wrote in this very Baroque style, even as the classical era had already been emerging. I first came across this piece, this set of 11 caprices, through a very interesting recording by a Baroque cellist, or cellist period, but she was playing this recording on Baroque cello. Kristen von der Goltz, a European cellist, and she has this really sensitive recording that I found on YouTube. It made me very curious, and of course nowadays everything's on the internet, so you just go on IMSLP and you can see the edition, you can also see the manuscript, and it's just incredible. So able to access the music quite easily, and I think these pieces are really interesting because they're written, in this Baroque style, but they're about as far from the music of J.S. Bach, which is sort of the gold standard for solo cello music of that era.
Yeah.
They're as far from Bach as possible. They're very improvisatory and virtuosic. The sense of structure is not as present, not as predominant. But I love playing them, and I've often played them as encores.
Let's hear now Caprices 1, 7, and 8 of Joseph dell'Abaco, performed by our guest cellist Zlatomir Fung. Born in Brussels, capital of the then Spanish Netherlands, Joseph Marie Clement Ferdinand dell'Abaco was musically trained by his father, also a composer, Evaristo Felice dell'Abaco. The younger composer worked in Bonn, traveled to England, worked there, worked in Verona. He was given the title of Baron in 1766 by Prince Maximilian of Bavaria, even though he lived well into the classic period, living from 1710 to 1805. Gosh, old guy. His writing is very firmly in the Baroque style. I love these pieces, Zlatomir, and you play them so beautifully. And what you bring to the present experience, also in terms of your taste in repertoire, is just formidable. I recommend that everyone go check out the complete recording you've done on YouTube of all these 11 caprices by dell'Abaco. Just wonderful, wonderful playing too, on top of everything else.
Thank you. Thank you.
This live performance was done on August 28th, 2020 as part of a Dream Stage live broadcast at the Futura Productions in Roslindale, Massachusetts. Recording engineer was John Weston. So that was, I guess that was by necessity a broadcast, during COVID, I guess.
Yeah, it was. And actually that particular holds kind of a special place in my heart, because right after the lockdown started, myself, along with a lot of other performing musicians, we started a sense of dread. What is our purpose? There were times when I just wasn't practicing and I felt no motivation, no will to to approach the cello on a daily basis. And when this opportunity arose, live stream broadcast, it was going to be like a real performance, one take only, no edits, for the world to see. It was the first time since March of 2020 that I had really practiced. And I remember just after one particularly long session, I remember feeling like, wow, it just feels really great to get back into it and really try to do your best and give everything.
Wonderful stuff. That is a very disconcerting feeling, isn't it? Playing to a basically empty room and yet knowing that there are going to be thousands of people hearing this performance.
For me, also, what it is that just the focus, if you can get into that space where it's all about you and your relationship to the music, how you're channeling the music, then I can forget. The audience dissolves. Of course, I want them to come into the world that I'm creating, but ultimately it's just...
No, your focus and concentration is exemplary and quite obvious. And it also has the feeling of inviting the audience in. I think I was very assiduously working on Prokofiev's Second Concerto with some orchestra, and the audience, some people had the idea that they were intruding on my on my concentration. So I didn't really like that so much. But yes, this feeling of sharing is palpable in your performance, and that's just so laudable, so wonderful. Now, Zlatomir, you've performed already on some of the most illustrious stages in the world: recitals at Wigmore Hall in London, the Verbier Festival in Switzerland, of course, the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg at the Tchaikovsky, the Janáček May Festival in Ostrava, Czechoslovakia, Dresden, Cello Biennale Amsterdam, Cal Performances Berkeley, Newport Classical, Vancouver Recital Society, U Chicago Presents, Carnegie Hall Presents at Weill Hall, Orange County, Philadelphia, La Jolla, a recent tour of Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, and Japan, Chamber Music at Marlborough, Santa Fe, Chamber Music Northwest, Prussia Cove on tour, Moritzburg Festival in Germany, Domaine Forget up in Canada, Bravo Vale, concerto appearances with the Cleveland Orchestra, London Philharmonic, BBC Philharmonic, New York Philharmonic, Baltimore, Aspen Festival Orchestra, Dallas, Detroit, Seattle, Kansas City, Rochester, Rhode Island, Milwaukee, Utah, Winnipeg, Sacramento, Grant Park. You're just finishing up a year's artist in residence position with the Royal Philharmonic touring the UK. You've played a huge array of venues, so it's almost an unfair question to ask, but what would you say have been a few of your most memorable performances?
Oh my goodness. All I can say is I hope you cut all of what you just said.
Not a word of it.
Oh boy. Actually, it's funny because as you were going through that list, sort of, it was like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
Some of these performances, they fade in your memory, but then when you're reminded of them, all of them are sort of a special experience in their own way.
Of course.
And you remember the feeling of the hall, or wonderful collaborator you had, or someone you met in the audience, stuff like that. I think that's just one of the things that makes me grateful to be a musician, able to perform.
I want you to share some more of your insights. What have been your most challenging projects to date, and maybe some light bulb conceptual moments you've had along the way. But first, I'd like to share some of your exquisite Bach. We're going to hear from the Suite Number 1 in G major, the Courante, performed by our guest cellist Zlatomir Fung. I think we might agree that one learns most working on Bach's music. Do you feel it has shaped your playing of other musics, or do you find Bach to be a unique style and interpretive experience?
It's somehow it's both, because on one hand, I feel like the things that are required to stand and interpret Bach in a meaningful way, it's sort of a vocabulary that's so singular. I don't find myself thinking about other music sort of in that same way. But on the flip side, I do feel like Bach requires sort of the highest command of technique to really execute all the ideas that you want out of the instrument. And so in that sense, I always learn when I play Bach about how to play other pieces, because I'm learning like how to manage the bow in a way where there's more refinement, more control, how to think about pulse, how to think about intonation, these sorts of things that we grapple with.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you talk about intonation. I think of intonation in the Russian pedagogical way, which is to say intonation not as playing in tune or not in tune, but the projection and communication of intervals and the truth of that intervals. So the closeness of a half step that you can really portray so beautifully on a stringed instrument, the more forthright whole step, and then the vocal trajectory, the lyric trajectory of the larger intervals. And this is so much an instinctive and inherent part of your playing, that sense of intonation. It's really quite wonderful. Would you say your development as a musician has been a through line of steady progress, or have there been revelatory light bulb moments along the way?
I never feel like I'm improved. So I would say that sometimes I feel like I'm getting worse. But then, of course, when you look back, like at a recording from a few years earlier, you see things that I don't like. And in a way, I did maybe address that. And now I feel like I like the way that I play more now. So there is some change happening. But yeah, in terms of the trajectory, it was always really rocky. And I often think about when I was 15, I wanted to quit playing altogether. Really tough time. I guess I was hormonal or something, just teenage rebel. I was thinking like it was starting to get really serious, and I was like, do I really want to do this? Do I want to have all this pressure? Every time getting on stage is so difficult. And in a way, I still feel that it always is difficult, and it's never easier to get on stage. But now it's like I try to have a healthy relationship toward that and feel, that the difficulty is actually what it has to coexist with the joy and the gratitude for being able to do it. The two complement one another.
I want to stick with Bach for one more piece, but this one points up again your characteristic originality in choosing repertoire. What led you to perform on cello Bach's flute partita in A minor?
Well, one of the things I'm really grateful for was my teacher, Richard Aaron, was always looking for interesting things. And he has a really extensive knowledge of all sorts of pieces, both that his students over the years have played and things that he's heard other cellists play. So he had known about this recording that the Dutch cellist Anner Bijlsma had played. He had recorded this flute partita on a piccolo cello. It's a marvelous recording. And as a result, he had gotten his hands on this arrangement that you could do on a modern cello, on a normal cello. And I think it's quite beautiful. It's very different, of course, than the suites, both in terms of the structure and also just the nature of the writing, because it's for a different instrument. But really very challenging, but immensely rewarding to play. And I had a fun time. I played it at a number of recitals around the time when the recording that you're referencing was made in 20.
Let's hear the Allemande from the flute partita in A minor, performed by our guest, cellist Zlatomir Fung. That performance by Zlatomir Fung of the Allemande from Bach's Flute Partita in A minor comes to us from a wonderful concert recording as part of the Ann Arbor Symphony Orchestra's Giving Tuesdays event. It took place on November 23rd, 2021. The G major Bach we heard earlier came from that performance, and we'll now hear one more movement from that gorgeous recording. I really just loved that, the whole recording of that event. And again, that's something available in its entirety on YouTube. You should all check it out. From that gorgeous recording, one more movement from Gaspar Cassado's Suite for Solo Cello. We're going to hear the finale entitled Intermezzo e Danza. Zlatomir, tell us of your history with the Cassado and let our audience know what they should be listening for in this performance.
Sure. Well, this Cassado Suite is one of my favorite pieces to play for solo cello. Actually, it's particularly meaningful for me because Gaspar Cassado is one of my favorite cellists as well. Even though he recorded very little, I think what he did record as a performer is among the most exceptional stuff we have out there. And so he's been a big inspiration for me. And when I play his music, I think about how great of a cellist he was and sort of that lineage of great cellists passing on their technique and their viewpoints about music through the music they wrote. This movement is it's really fun. It starts out with this kind of, as the title suggests, is this intermezzo, but it's like this introduction, and it's it has this kind of a flair of the Iberian Peninsula, and there are these wonderful pizzicato motifs, and then it of course goes into this more fiery dance, which makes great use of the cello's range and particularly its capacity for double stops. So you can listen, it kind of goes to a very, very fiery conclusion. So definitely one of the most exciting movements written for solo cello.
We'll hear the finale, Intermezzo e Danza, from Gaspar Cassado's Suite for Solo Cello, played by our guest, cellist Zlatomir Fung. Just extraordinary music, and I was so happy to hear you say, pointing out that Cassado recorded so seldom. He was the teacher of one of our mutual friends, Benjamin Zander, and I was obsessed when I was at New England. You know, I had a trio, and we were playing the Ravel, and there was a recording with Menuhin, Louis Kentner, and Gaspar Cassado of the Ravel Trio. Right. And this is extraordinary, and I urge everybody to check that out. So I'm so glad you have an enthusiasm for Cassado and appreciation of his place in our history. Zlatomir, we've heard you mostly in solo cello music today, but I was blown away by your performance with pianist Boris Giltberg of the Rachmaninoff Cello Sonata. This comes to us from the Sinandal Festival in Georgia. That's Georgia, the overseas Georgia. Had you been there before? What was it like?
No, this concert was last September in 2023, and it was my first time visiting that part of the world, really. And it's a beautiful estate out there in Sinandali. They have a wonderful concert hall. They actually have two concert halls. This was in a smaller recital hall. And I think that the initiative there to bring classical music through this festival is fairly new, because when I went there, it was only the 5th edition, with the 2nd and 3rd obviously being interrupted by the pandemic. I'm really excited to see where the festival goes in the next few years. I think it has the potential to become a really major festival, and exciting for them.
We'll hear the second movement, Allegro Scherzando, from the Rachmaninoff Cello Sonata with cellist Zlatomir Fung and pianist Boris Giltberg. Our guest, cellist Zlatomir Fung, performed the second movement, Allegro Scherzando, from Sergei Rachmaninoff's Cello Sonata in G minor. Zlatomir, I hold a somewhat controversial opinion that both of the giant piano composers, Rachmaninoff and Chopin, wrote their greatest sonatas, in fact, for the cello. What do you think?
Wow. Well, in the case of Rachmaninoff, the music is amazing. It's hard to argue with that. I will say that it very often does feel like a piano sonata with just the cello doing a little bit to contribute.
Yes.
But of course, it's one of the great works for cello, and so many memorable themes in there. Just lots of great emotional, heart on the sleeve moments.
Oh, really wonderful. This is a beautiful performance by you two. And it's beautifully recorded as well. Just very special the way you play. We're very excited to close this special episode with Zlatomir Fung with a sneak preview from his upcoming debut album to be released in January 2025 on the Signum label. We're grateful to Signum for clearing this sneak preview for Over the Top. Tell us about the record, Zlatomir, and what all is on it, and do you have a title for it yet?
Yeah, so this project, it's very special to me because it had sort of been incubating since around January of 2021, and finally got around to recording it just in December of 2023. And the idea of the project is that it's all opera paraphrases or opera fantasies for cello and piano. I think the working title of the album is Opera Fantasies or something like that, although we haven't decided. And it was I did this project with my good friend Richard Fu, who is a wonderful collaborative pianist, wonderful pianist in general, but he particularly works with singers, and he was working in opera houses for the past several years. So he has this very intimate knowledge of the repertoire and that kind of style of music. So it was great to work on it with him. I became really interested in this genre because I've always been a bit of a cello nerd and really interested in cello technique. And one of my favorite, a couple of my favorite composers from the 19th century who wrote for cello, Piatti, who wrote the famous 12 Caprices, and Servais, who also wrote a famous set of Caprices, they both had written opera fantasies on famous Italian operas from the early 19th century. And so I started learning these pieces during the pandemic, and I gave a little virtual recital of them. And then I kept discovering more and more of them, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I noticed that one of the pieces that I had found actually on IMSLP just by chance had never been commercially recorded, and I thought it was a really interesting one. This is the piece by this French cellist Enel, and it's an opera fantasy on William Tell, Rossini's William Tell. Although, funnily enough, it doesn't feature any music at all from the overture, so you don't get to do that. But it's nonetheless a wonderful fantasy, and we had it on the album. Yeah, so this is a project that we're really excited about releasing next year.
And I understand you're contributing an arrangement of your own. Tell everybody about that.
Yeah, so as part of my fascination with this genre, I wanted to take a crack at it myself. So I did a fantasy on Leos Janáček's Jenůfa, and that was a very interesting experience because I had never done an arrangement of that kind of scale. It's about a 15-minute piece.
Wow.
And I had to sort of take moments from the opera that I wanted to feature in a cello and piano arrangement, and then also find a way to stitch them together, for lack of a better word, in a way that would be cohesive. It was a great challenge, and I'm really grateful that I got to do it. And I hope people like it. Looking forward to sharing it.
We're going to hear the final two variations of Servais' fantasy on Donizetti's Daughter of the Regiment. In my non-cello geek sensibility, this is a rarity for me, but I guess not even as rare as that William Tell that you discovered.
Right.
Let's
In the
hear
context in the context of the album, it's actually the standard repertoire work.
Let's hear this sneak preview from Zlatomir Fung's upcoming commercial debut on Signum. The pianist is Richard Fu. And for those watching, the photos are by Marco Borghi. So brilliant. I can't wait for this record to come out, and so excited about this commercial debut, Zlatomir. It's so exciting. January 2025. Zlatomir, it's been such a pleasure to catch up on all your incredible accomplishments and developments over these last 10 years since we worked together. Thank you for being with us on Over the Top.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to speak with you.
And thank you, listeners, for going with me over the top with my musical friends, old and new. Thanks again to our friend over at the Cello Sherpa podcast, Joel Dallow, for giving me the idea, the courage, and expertise to take my hosting persona into the podcast realm. And lest we forget to tell you of my own new release, there's the cover photo over my shoulder of my Parma recording of J.S. Bach, The Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1. It comes out on July 12th. Join us again next time as we go over the top.